Thank you so much, everyone, for coming today. And thank you so much, Kaylee, for taking your time to come talk to us. I just want to make sure, am I pronouncing your name right? It's Kaylee, correct? Or
Yes, that's correct.
okay. So yeah, as I said, thank you so much for taking the time out of your, probably very busy schedule to just, come and speak to us today. We all really appreciate it. So I think one of the main questions a lot of us have been very curious about is, for you, what was the catalyst, in your life that inspired you and motivated you to go into the world of astronomy and astrophysics?
Yeah, so when I was in high school, I took physics just as a requirement. And I remember really enjoying one particular project where it was just like basic equations of motion, like some very simple, like just acceleration, velocity equations. But we were able to completely predict where we were, like if we fired this little ball at a certain speed, we were perfectly able to predict where it would end up in like on the other side of the room. And I just thought that was extremely cool. The fact that we were able to even learn predict this very simple thing about our world. And so I wasn't necessarily planning on going into physics at that point. But then when I went to college, I ended up taking a few physics classes and particularly took one on cosmology just out of interest. And the professor was incredible. I didn't have the prerequisites for the class, but he let me take it anyway. And then I just couldn't stop like reading about all these things that we are able to learn about, like literally like millions and billions of years ago, based on just a few photons today. The amount of information we're able to pull out of such a little amount of data and extrapolate to like know about our entire universe is just incredibly impressive. So I wanted to, I guess, be a part of that and learn more about that.
So did you always, like, after you got into, astronomy and astrophysics, did you know that you wanted to like eventually pursue a PhD and do research specifically, or did you discover that passion later on in your career?
Yeah, I didn't even really know that getting a PhD was a thing. So I kind of just was taking it one day at a time at the beginning, where I was like, oh, so this thing I'm interested in is very cool. I'll keep learning about it, and then ended up majoring in physics and astrophysics specifically because I was really interested in it. And then the most common thing, at least for the people who are getting astrophysics at my school, was to go on to get a PhD, because if you're going to do astrophysics as a career, you need a PhD. And I was like, I'm still not sure I will end up as a professor or something like that, but having that as an option was very exciting. I like having students as well, so I was able to like work with and mentor some students while I was in college, and do like a few small research projects. And as I like dipped my toes into that more and like did summer research and then went to grad school and did more research with more students, yeah, I really enjoyed it. And so I'm still here. This is actually probably about half the people in my program leave physics and end up doing something else, just because the skills that you learn are broadly applicable, because you learn coding, you learn mathematical analysis and statistics. And so it's nice to be able to learn, I guess, useful skills while doing something you're really interested in, and then have the option of staying in that field or expanding into others if you want. So I'm still not sure where I'll end up exactly, but there are lots of options if you study astrophysics, which is pretty.
Yeah, you mentioned, like being a professor and, teaching other students. And I know you used to be like a physics show assistant at, Texas A&M University. And you used to like carry out physics demonstrations for like middle and high school students. So most of our members, at the Saudi Youth Space Association already have a passion for the sciences, including physics, because they have very pivotal roles in astronomy. However, from your experience, how do you reach out to a student who may not have had fond memories from science, regarding science in the past, especially because sometimes the school curriculum can have like a huge focus on memorization. And so sometimes, people may not develop a passion for science just because of the way, sometimes teachers teach it.
Yeah, I would definitely say in my experience, most people do not have fond views of learning math and physics. And so, yeah, that's definitely, I'll tell people that I'm a physicist and they're like, ugh. And it's like, no, it's fun, I swear. So yeah, in like experiences like the Physics Roadshow, or I've done a few middle school level classes where I just teach like a few like small, like the very like introductory cosmology and things like that. And so in those situations, since like traditional schooling is so focused on memorization and things like that, and because I am with children for such a small amount of time in the situations that I'm just teaching a small class or just doing a few shows, I really just try to focus on the fun of it because there is so much fun. So that's really easy in the Physics Roadshow, for example, because I'm, freezing things with, ice and like exploding water bottles. So that is really easy to access the fun. But even in the like short cosmology classes, there's so many like fascinating facts. So I'll show up a picture, like one of my favorite pictures from astrophysics is it's called the Hubble Extreme Deep Field. And it's this image from the Hubble Space Telescope that just focused on a tiny bit of sky for a really long amount of time. So it's just collected a lot of information from this one patch of sky. And just, you can see thousands of galaxies in this tiny little bit of sky. And so the idea of seeing that many galaxies in just this one little bit, if you extrapolate that and think about just how small we are and how many galaxies are in the universe, it's like this very humbling thought, and just kind of, that's much more exciting to think about than like memorizing the Hubble equation and like calculating the photons exactly. I mean, I enjoy that part too, but you have to enjoy that because you are excited about the big information behind it. So I guess, yeah, focusing on like the big ideas gets people interested. Astrophysics has a bunch of beautiful images. So like my background is the Crab Nebula. And so that's another way that people, it's an accessible way to get people interested, is these beautiful pictures. And there's, that applies to lots of aspects of science as well. Because there's so much beauty there. You just have to be able to express it to people who haven't been able to see it before.
You mentioned how in astrophysics, you learn a lot of really crucial things that can sometimes make people go into other careers like coding. And I know you're currently studying our galaxy using, high performance computing methods. So how important do you think computer science is currently in astronomical, and discoveries in astrophysics?
Yeah, it's very important. So every aspect of astronomy and astrophysics research that I have seen involves coding in some way. Just because, we're collecting large amounts of data. We're, running models that there's like a handful of like people who still do things by hand, but basically we have all these computational resources now. And so you're able to just use that as an extension of your own brain and get so much more done because of it. So in my field, it's especially important because I do simulation work. And so that's, you have to, these like very large detailed simulations have to run on supercomputers. And so you have to do all of these computer science, parallelization, you have to like optimize all the code, things like that. So yeah, computer science is very important. I didn't realize how I took like 2 computer science classes before. And so this has been like, very much a learning curve for me at least. But it's also very exciting to learn all of these resources to then like expand. Like once again, it's literally just like expanding your own brain power, because you can, if I want to solve something, I can tell the computer to solve it for me, which is really great. And it is by the current simulations that I'm running are going to take like a year to run on a supercomputer, which is just also kind of mind-boggling because we're simulating the universe from like 13 billion years ago up until like the end of star formation in some of these small dwarf galaxies. And so, yeah, it's just something a human, like normally just a small part of that would be like a human's entire life project, but I can have a supercomputer do all the calculations for me and just end up with all these incredibly detailed simulations. So it's very important for sure, but it's also like a great time to be doing this work because computational resources have exploded basically. Like at least like, so I know in America they're building like this exascale computer right now, which I don't even remember which prefix. X is like 10 to the 20 or something, like computations per second. So it's just an absurd amount of computational power. And none of this existed even like 10 years ago. So it's a very good time to be doing this sort of stuff.
Did you develop, sort of like a passion for coding because of astronomy and astrophysics and your need for it? Or did you like work on, coding in the past before you entered this field?
I had never done traditional programming. I had made some websites before, which is like a small form of programming, I guess. Just HTML, a little bit of CSS. So I wasn't like scared of it necessarily, but I definitely learned it out of necessity for astrophysics, and then found a lot of enjoyment in it from there because of how useful it is. Also, it's also extremely frustrating, but the good days and the bad days, they weigh themselves out, and you end up, doing more than you would have been able to otherwise. But yeah, I did think it was interesting because when I was getting my physics degree, they didn't require any computer science or programming. And I always thought that was a bit of a mistake. So I don't know how their universities are, but I definitely am recommending to basically anyone who is interested in physics or even the other sciences more broadly to get a pretty good background in coding because it is extremely useful.
So I know that this is probably a difficult question, but what, in your opinion, what's your favorite part of astrophysics?
It's a big question. My favorite part is actually the people, because science is so social, and being able to work with all these very passionate and like talented people is the reason that I like day to day really enjoy my work. And I found astrophysics to also be like a more accessible, just at least in the small circles that I ran in. People were very accepting, very welcoming, very friendly. I will email people out of the blue that I've never met and they'll get back to me, which is incredibly nice. So I met some really wonderful people. And from like, the big ideas side, it's just, I think kind of the humbling aspect that I alluded to earlier, where you see some of these images and you do some of these calculations and like, it's just, none of it is on a human scale at all. It's pure nonsense numbers where you're like, oh, this thing was, this light, it's 13 billion years old. And it teaches us about these fluctuations that were on like 10 to the minus 32 time scale, and just things that just sound ridiculous, but it's all real and we're all like basing it in fully physical models. And like, in my simulation work, I, model galaxies, and like planets don't even make the cut, like let alone humans. So like seeing how little of an impact we make on the universe as a whole is, humbling, I guess, like good and bad, kind of, makes you feel very small. But that's also kind of nice, that perspective of, none of it like really matters, just trying to do our best and, be good people in the world, and the universe doesn't care on the whole, it seems. So that's kind of not a perspective you get from most jobs, I would say.
Abdullah has a question. he's asking like, what are the facilities that are provided for like undergraduate and graduate students like interested in astronomy at MIT?
So MIT has a partnership with a few telescopes. So that is a very nice thing where the Magellan telescope in Chile is like, MIT is one of the leading group that runs that. And it's like one of the best ground-based telescopes. And so I have never been, but any student that's interested basically is able to go and use it like on behalf of a professor, which is a very exciting option. And like there's some beautiful images you can get from that, some beautiful data. There's also like MIT is currently building a computational cluster. They've actually been kind of lacking on the computational, general use computational resources, but they're currently working on expanding that as well. And then of course the professors are all top-notch people that are very talented, have done tons of very important work, and are virtually all extremely friendly and willing to talk to you about anything. So like, it's all, yeah, there are a lot of resources, I would say.
So do you have any ideas about how like a high school student interested in research can get started on that from now?
Yeah, so I know, I'm trying to think. I think there might be a few, I'm not sure if there are a few programs or not, like generally speaking, or if they're just with local schools, but I've definitely seen high schoolers on campus before through formal programs. I would have to look that up to see actually the details of what that is. But also more generally speaking, you can, like, there's no guarantee, but you can always just cold email someone, just email someone, a professor directly, say, I'm fascinated in your work, maybe like prove it a little bit by, showing that you read some of their stuff or something like that, and just ask if they have like anything small that you could be a part of. And students generally cost money. So if you're just a high school student wanting to help a little bit and you don't require money, that actually might be a bonus. They might be interested in that. And if you aren't even trying to get into research quite yet, there are tons of other options in terms of just like getting ready for that type of work. So once again, like making sure like learning Python as a programming language is a very common analysis language. And so just like learning all the basics of that, maybe reading some general texts about astronomy, or like seeing, I think MIT has like OpenCourseWare with a few classes that you can just like watch for free. And all of those are great options for if you're interested in this type of work, looking into it more and seeing if this might be something you want to pursue and get ready to do.
So a student is asking, so some universities offer like bachelor's degrees in physics, but some universities also offer them specifically, for instance, in like astrophysics or astronomy. So, if from your perspective, if someone's interested in going into the field of astrophysics, should they, initially get a bachelor's in astrophysics, or should they just go, more broadly in physics and then specialize in their graduate degree?
Yeah, I would say physics is probably the way to go. Having a strong background in the fundamentals is, especially if you are planning to go into grad school, you'll learn more astronomy if that's what you're going to do. But like getting the physics degree first and making sure your basic thermodynamics and like general mechanics and things like that is like probably the way to start. And usually it seems like graduate school admissions also looks a bit more favorably upon physics degrees because of that strong fundamental basis than some of the more specialized astronomy degrees, for example, where you may not know like quantum mechanics and some of the other things that you should know if you want to make this your full career.
So as a graduate, researcher, how are you able to manage your time effectively? And what recommendations do you have for like high school students, wanting to improve their time management skills, especially during this like pandemic when we're all stuck at home?
I want to know the answer to that question, actually. That is not something I feel like I have mastered at all, especially because in graduate school, a lot of the structure of your day-to-day goes away, because in high school, you have classes and like homework that you turn in regularly, same thing in undergraduate university. And then in graduate school, it's just kind of nebulous. You have these large projects that you have to finish on the time span of years, and people are kind of checking up on you, but not really. So yeah, time management is very difficult, especially during the pandemic. Yeah, I just try to put structure into my day just for myself, like block out schedules of time, say, every week, say these are the things I want to get done this week, and I'm going to try to do this one this day, and it definitely does not work out that way almost ever, but at least trying to have that structure in there is useful. Yeah, I wish I had a better answer for that. It's very difficult.
When you're not studying, colliding galaxies and exploding stars, what do you like to do for fun?
Yeah, I like to do a lot of things for fun to get away from my computer. So I have always been very into art and painting and drawing. So that is something that I've continued to do. I've even done some inspired, like I've done some work paintings of galaxies and things, just because they're beautiful, and so they're also fun to paint. So that, and getting outside as much as I can. I run. Yeah, I definitely make sure to have a lot of time, also because when I spend like time away from my analysis, I get better at my analysis. So like on a run, if I'm struggling with something, I'll go for a run, and I'll like kind of meditate it on the back of my mind, and like be able to like think about solutions that way as well, instead of just like staring at my screen and like being unable to figure out what to do next. So it's good mentally, but also good productive wise, I feel, to take lots of time. And that's actually one of the bonuses of having not as much structure in my day, is I will just in the middle of the day take a break if I need to paint or run, or just get outside for a bit. Yeah, that's definitely very important. And that's also maybe a little bit of a bonus of being a computational worker, because I work on computers. I don't have to be in the lab all day. So that is like some physicists, they'll spend, 8 hours working in the lab, and that's definitely not my day to day. I'll spend a few hours at a time working on something on the computer, maybe longer. But it's a lot easier to take a break, especially while code is running and things like that. So I like that.
So Juman is asking, what career options are there other than, specifically being a professor or working with a space agency that someone studying astrophysics could pursue?
Yeah, so if you want to do astrophysics research as your job, there aren't a ton of options outside of like universities or government funded work. So like, NASA, or there's other national labs, at least in America, we have like Argonne and like a few others. Because yeah, the private sector is it's hard to make money. Like it's hard to like get a product out of astrophysics research, because it's like kind of this fundamental like learning about the universe that is not, great at making money quickly. So if you want to actually do that type of work, it's going to have to be through a larger organization. There might be a few private ones now. So there's like SpaceX, I think is a private organization that has started doing some more research as well. But generally speaking, yeah, those are your options. And there are quite a few, there are not a lot of options to be a lot of jobs if you want to be a professor. That's very competitive, but there are a lot more jobs if you want to work in like one of the labs at like NASA or, you know, Argonne or something like that. So those are very good, well-paying jobs. And I've also mentioned a lot of people leave the field because you have a lot of other very useful skills. And so, yeah, people from my program in the last few years have gone into finance. You know, some of them are on Wall Street. A lot of them go into tech because, once again, you're probably by the end of your like studies a very good programmer and someone who is good at math and statistics and working with lots of data. And tons of companies love those skills. So, and those jobs outside of academia also pay a lot better. So that is also a pull. So it is definitely very nice to have options if you go down this career path, both if you stay within academia or if you decide that you want to, you know, work on something for a company or something else in the, you know, real.
What was it like for you when you had, you know, your first, because, you know, you've published some research. So like, what was it like for you when you had, you know, your first research idea? Was it like a light bulb moment where you had like a question about something? Or was it more like you know, you were looking through literature and you sort of, you know, found a question through that?
Yeah, it was a little of both, but also I wouldn't describe it as a light bulb moment because I didn't trust it. I like didn't trust myself to like know enough, right? Like that's like I had a question about something and I'm like, oh, it's probably a dumb question because I don't know what I'm doing, which is like I think something that a lot of people feel and I still feel sometimes. So yeah, I had a question about some aspect of research and I asked someone that I trusted, you know, like one of the professors. I was like, oh, what about this thing? And they're like, actually, we don't know. And I was like maybe that, you know, that would be an interesting thing to find out. And that was a very exciting moment of like, okay, wait, I had a good question. And like, this is actually something people would be interested to learn that we don't know yet. And that, you know, those questions arise from like the first research projects I did were not my own questions. They were things that other people, like other professors said like, oh, this is interesting, you should look into it. And so then I did. And by doing that, I started getting questions of my own about aspects of that work that then it's a rabbit hole and you just keep going deeper because the more that you learn, the more questions there are. And yeah, you never have enough time to study all the things that you would like to see like answered. But that's also where students come in because now I have like a list of things that I'm curious about and a student will contact me and be like, oh, or like, I would be interested in doing some work on this. Like, do you have any small projects? I'm like, actually, I do have some small projects. If you know, if you're around for the summer, we could do something, you know. So it's really nice. And, you know, professors do that on a larger scale where they have their big questions, their small questions, and they just like assign it to different people. And then those people branch out on their own questions. And yeah, it's very exciting to just like gradually be developing more and more knowledge about all of these subjects.
So do you plan to become a professor in the future after, you know, you finish your PhD?
I am currently planning to try. Once again, it's like very much easier said than done because like it's a very competitive field. And even if you get a job, you don't have any say necessarily in where that job is. And so, you know, I care about location because of my family. And so I won't take just any job. So currently I'm planning to, you know, publish as much research as I can right now, try to get a good position just after my PhD and see if that leads into a professorship. But I'm also not worried if it doesn't because, as I've mentioned, there are so many options for other jobs that if I feel like I need to compromise some aspect of my personal life, you know, if I need to move somewhere that I don't want to move and like, you know, leave my family, then I don't have to do that. I can get another job that, you know, is still interesting, will still use my skills. But, you know, there are a lot more options for non-academic jobs. So I'm going to keep that as my, I guess, because I really like research and working with students and teaching, I'm going to try first the professorship and then, you know, just see how that goes and have like a lot of good backup options if not.
So for high school students today, what recommendations do you have for things they could work on to help them go into this field, you know, hopefully in the near future?
Yeah, I think it's all about the fundamentals. So like learning like calculus and physics and just like all the basics, like making sure you actually like are understanding all of that well, because that is like the basis of everything. You know, I still will, you know, like I have some friends that, you know, still are like, yeah, I should have learned calculus better, and you know, it makes life harder later on. So you want to like early on make sure you're actually understanding all the things that you're currently learning, and then also, you know, potentially developing some skills that you'll need later on if you want to like read a little bit more into specific aspects of astronomy, like current research, or, you know, once again, do some small coding projects. All of that will, you know, pay itself back. And also it's fun. It's also a good way to see, I guess, if it's fun for you, is you can try starting to look into more of these things and see if you enjoy it. And if you enjoy it, you know, like, okay, I can go more into this and see how it goes, versus if you start programming and you're like, this is the worst thing ever, then maybe you'd be like, okay, maybe I'll do something else. So it's a good way to, you know, try it.
So when it comes to research, you know, a lot of sometimes when students, especially when they're not in university yet, they want to access research papers. A lot of them cost money, and I know that there are some websites that offer, you know, like free research papers, and sort of, you know, access to those types of research papers. So do you know any like websites that help with that?
Yes, never pay the journal. They don't need your money. As I say, so there's Sci-Hub. If you just Google SCIHUB, that has a ton of papers. For physics and astronomy in particular, there is a website that people put all their papers on for free most of the time, called the Archive, and that's it's archive with an X, and so it's ARXIV. And if you search any papers, they'll probably be on there as well as on the journal's website. So that's the website I use for most of the time. And if you are interested in reading something and you can't find it on either of those websites, just email the lead author on the paper and ask if they have a PDF, and they will send you a PDF. Yeah, because the journal, none of that money that you would pay to the journal actually goes to the scientists anyway. It's all just a part of like the, you know, for-profit part of the journal, and there are a lot of other ways to get it that students should not be paying.
Does anyone else have any questions that they haven't sent to me already? So someone's asking, do you have an inspirational quote that you like?
Ooh, I definitely do. Off the top of my head, almost anything from Carl Sagan is very good. But there's I fully can't quote the actual phrase now, but there's his pale blue dot quote, where y'all may or may not be familiar with this story, but there was a like space telescope that was sent out. Was it Voyager? I think it was Voyager. So there was this telescope that was sent out from Earth to go and just like take images of the solar system. And it's, you know, outside of the solar system now. It's this very incredible piece of technology. But basically, when this telescope was near Saturn, it was going to take a picture of Saturn and its rings. And I think at Carl Sagan's request, it also turned and it took a picture of Earth in the image. And so in this image, you know, you can see like the rings of Saturn, and you see this like tiny dot, and that tiny dot is Earth. And then like Carl Sagan's quote about this, he's like everything you love, everything that ever was, that you care about and ever will care about, is all on this like tiny pale dot in this pixel. And, you know, so like, you know, once again, it's that idea of like in the grand scheme of things, like we're so small and like this is all we have. This is like little dot, and we all are on it together, and we all have to do our best to take care of it because it's all we have. And it's the only thing that we're near that is able to host, you know, like all this incredible amount of life. You know, Mars is like far from habitable, and, you know, people want to move there, but it, like Earth has everything we need, this water. It's, you know, had us for so many years. And so we all need to like work together to take care of it and, you know, realize that we're all in this together. So I thought you should look up the actual quote because he says it better than I do, but it's a.
So Siba is asking, what's the greatest tip that you would ever give?
That is a big question. Greatest tip that I would ever give. I would say, like, I guess talent and intelligence like are very important, but the most useful thing in research, and I imagine in most careers, is like perseverance and just, you know, like you want to like do things intelligently, and but the biggest thing is just like working hard and caring about what you're doing, and that will get you much farther than, you know, just a little bit of inherent talent. I think the inherent talent or whatever is all kind of overrated. So the biggest tip is just like, you know, if you like care about something and want to succeed at something, like perseverance and spending time and working hard on it is the way. And like, I guess lots of people know that is the way to do it. It's just hard. But yeah, that is the most important part of being a researcher by far, is continuing in the face, especially because sometimes you don't get results for years. There's like this one story of like the gravitational wave detector LIGO that they got the Nobel Prize a few years ago when they, for their detections of like black holes colliding. And so it's this incredible instrument, it has this incredible work, but they spent like 30 or 40 years failing. I don't even know how they continue to get funding, but they, you know, but the people who are leading it like really believe, they're like, this is important and interesting work, and like we're going to get it right. We're going to figure it out. And yeah, it took them decades, but they did it, and it's like one of the most incredible current working observatories in the world. So yeah, the perseverance is definitely the way.
Lean is asking, does the research question, topic, and idea supposed to be a new one, like no one has done this before?
Yeah, but it's also like no one having done it before can come in a lot of forms, because like maybe there's some, like maybe someone has done something similar, but there's some new aspect to what you're doing, and that's what's the interesting part of it. Because, you know, people have done a lot of work. So like I simulate galaxies, but I'm not the first person to simulate dwarf galaxies forming. So the different part of my work is that I focus a lot on individual stellar feedback. So I have a really high resolution on individual stars that no one has done before. And so it's like finding like a small part that no one has done before and adding that in to the bigger thing that probably a lot of people are working on. And then, yeah, seeing which small things are important, and then, you know, continuing to add on to that.
Nana is asking, can people with a degree in astrophysics have a research fellowship with the CERN or have a working opportunity there?
Yes, definitely. So I know, so there's like a subfield called astroparticle physics for people who are interested in both astronomy and particle physics. So CERN is the really big particle accelerator in Geneva. And I know quite a few people that have worked there. I actually briefly did research with CERN. It wasn't astrophysics related research, but I worked on the when I was in college, I briefly did some work on the detector trigger. It's just like a part of the detector. But yeah, there's a lot of overlap between subfields, and if you can find some justification for why you'd be interested in colliding particles, and there are a lot of colliding particles in space, and so maybe studying them at CERN is a good basis for whatever you're interested in space. Yeah, they're just to be at CERN as well.
Okay, so Aisha is asking, being a high school student, what things are we supposed to learn or practice if we intend to take up astrophysics in the future? And I think you already have sort of answered this question before.
Yeah, it's tough because it's probably not that useful to go right off the bat deep into astrophysics. Yeah, like I mentioned before, yeah, making sure like you get your fundamentals of physics and math and some computer science is probably the most important thing. And then if you feel comfortable with that, you can also go deeper in terms of starting to read some, maybe just astronomy news. There's actually, there's a pretty good website that I didn't mention before. It's mostly used by, I think, college students and maybe some graduate students. But depending on the article, it might be accessible to high schoolers as well. Anyway, it's called Astrobytes. And so it's just like one word astro and then bite, like taking a bite out of something. And that website is students who are majoring or like getting a PhD in astrophysics will write short articles about current research. And so it's a lot more like journal articles are very hard to read. They're still hard to read for me, just because they're so dense. If you don't already know all the things they're talking about, it takes forever to get through. And so that's a very hard place to start, is looking at journal articles. But if you go to like a website like Astrobytes, it will summarize important, so there's a link in the chat now. It'll summarize important research going on right now in a way that's a lot easier to read. So that could also be useful to look at. That's definitely something that I look at regularly, because it's also more enjoyable to read because they put it in a much more like conversational tone than the very, dry journal article.
So if anyone doesn't have any more questions, I think we can wrap up today's webinar. Thank you so much, Kaylee, for taking the time to come talk to us today. I'm sorry, we have one more question. Okay, so Abdul Aziz is asking, I'm not going to major in astrophysics, but I'm very interested in it. What books would you recommend that have a comprehensive and solid background in this field?
So I should, once again, off the top of my head, I actually haven't read that many books that aren't textbooks. So I'm trying to think of one that would be a good one. I've heard, so Stephen Hawking has a few, it was A Brief History of Time. I've heard some good things about that book. Things by Carl Sagan are always, he is great. I think probably A Brief History of Time would be a good one to look at, and see also like recommendations for people who like that book. That would probably be good.
I also by Neil Tyson called Astrophysics for People in a Hurry. I felt that I read that book and the information in it is really understandable for someone that has no idea what astrophysics is. So that could also be a good recommendation. So thank you so much, Kaylee, again for talking to us today. We really appreciate it. And I'm sure you're gonna revolutionize astrophysics one day. And you already have.
Well, thank y'all so much for having me. This is a lot of fun. I love to talk about this sort of stuff, and I'm sure you will all go on to do incredible things.